Even if you haven't played Yume Nikki, there's a good chance you vaguely know of its existence. It's lumped in with all the quirky Earthbound-inspired indie RPGs, it serves as a source of inspiration for several popular games, and it's responsible for a fairly infamous Easter egg. However, while there's a fair amount of people who know about Yume Nikki from YouTube and vague whisperings, the percentage of those people who've actually played it is pretty low. The game has a passionate fanbase, don't get me wrong, but said fanbase is mostly relegated to small circles. And it's not like the game is gonna become a mainstream hit anytime soon. Yume Nikki is just hard to sell to people. Just trying to classify it as a single genre is a Herculean task. Is it an RPG? Is it a horror game? Is it a 2009 American comedy film starring Kevin James as the titular character Paul Blart? That's just the thing. Yume Nikki is a game that is unlike anything else I've ever played. I played it for the first time this year, or last year depending on how much I've slacked off on this video, and something about it resonated deeply with me. So I'm making this video in a desperate attempt to get people to join the Yume Nikki cult and explain why this weird little game is something you should try. Also, just because I don't have a better place to put this, I am specifically talking about the original freeware game, not the manga, not the 2018 reboot, and not the fan games. I have not personally experienced any of those three things, and while I do intend to try the third sometime, everything I've heard about the first two has been less than stellar. Yume Nikki was created by someone who only goes by the pseudonym Kikiyama, and little is known about this person. Their real name is unknown, their gender is up for debate, and for 10 years nobody even knew if they were alive. What this means is that unlike most other games, you can't just find out the thought process that went into Yume Nikki and use that to understand it. As a result, Yume Nikki is a game that you inherently have to interpret with a death of the author mentality, which gives it this mysterious quality. And this mysterious quality transfers to the contents of the game itself. When you create a save file, you get a couple instruction screens and then immediately appear in a room. No story, no bombastic first level, nothing. You play as a girl with the name Matasuki, which roughly translates to windowed, and if you try to have her exit the room, she simply refuses to do so. So there's only one thing you can do. Or you could also make her go to sleep and access a whole different world. After walking through the dream versions of the two real-life screens, you will arrive in the Nexus, an area that serves as the game's main hub world. There is no music whatsoever, and the floor has a distinct pattern that resembles the textiles created by the Paracas people. In the center of this room is a circle of 12 doors, each containing a different world. This is where the core gameplay loop of Yume Nikki officially begins. By now, you're probably asking questions like, so what exactly is this core gameplay loop? What do you do in Yume Nikki? What are the amazing gameplay mechanics that drive your obsession with this game? Walking. It's a game where you just walk. Of all the labels that have been used to describe Yume Nikki, Walking Simulator is probably the closest to an accurate one, although it still has some caveats. Now, the game has an ending that you can obtain by collecting 24 different effects and placing them in the Nexus. But the main appeal of Yume Nikki isn't the destination, it's the journey. You can explore a bunch of worlds, whether it's the 12 you can access directly from the Nexus or the various other worlds hidden within those 12. Each of these worlds has its own distinct atmosphere. There's Snow World, which has this cold ambiance. There's the Mole Rooftop, which feels oddly happy. There's the Barrack Settlement, which feels more dreary. And there's the various FC worlds, where the visuals change to ones inspired by those of Famicom games, and Mother 1 in particular. But no matter what world you decide to explore, there's one constant: nothing makes sense. Worlds loop endlessly, NPCs have weird designs, and everything just seems to defy conventional logic. When I was gathering footage for this video, I decided to stream the process, and nobody in the chat had any clue what was going on. I can only imagine what it must have been like for anyone who didn't know anything about the game and saw the phrase severed head whenever I opened the menu. Yume Nikki gives off the same feeling as a surrealist painting, but given the game's concept, this works out. This is a game about dreams, and dreams don't entirely make sense. When I was a kid, I had a dream where I got married to a tornado. Weird shit just comes with the territory of dreams. However, while Yume Nikki is a game about dreams in general, it's also a game about a specific type of dream: a nightmare. Any discussion of Yume Nikki would not be complete without touching upon the game's darker aspects. Some would even go as far to call it a horror game, but I really wouldn't go that far. Although you can find some scares, the main thing that makes Yume Nikki feel like a nightmare isn't any individual scare, but rather a prevailing feeling of discomfort. Most areas in Yume Nikki have a large size, and the game's endless looping adds to their perceived scale. In most other games, these areas would be teeming with enemies, friendly NPCs, or any other sign of life. But in most areas of Yume Nikki, NPCs are few and far between. Not only that, but most of the NPCs in question have such abstract and unpersonified designs that it feels like they're ignoring Matasuki. This causes the game to evoke the same feeling as a liminal space picture. There's a complete juxtaposition between the signs of life you'd expect to see and the emptiness that you'll actually see. Not only that, but the game's soundtrack also deserves mention for the unnerving atmosphere it creates. Most of the game's songs consist of the same few notes being looped over and over again. This causes some uncomfortable form of potential energy. You're waiting for some hidden danger to sprout out and for the music to pick up, but that danger will never come out and you'll always be stuck on edge. The game doesn't just stick to one type of discomfort though, as many of its worlds add something else. There's a checkered tile path which has a hazy look to it and a sinister backing track. There's Neon World, which is one of the rare areas with tons of NPCs but still feels uncomfortable due to the constant use of flashing lights. There's Witch's Island, which has you walk past uncanny faceless witches while an eerie track plays. And there's the Dark Woods, which is filled with giant pairs of eyeballs, giving you the feeling that you're being watched. And since you have to use the lantern effect to be able to see anything, you can't use a bicycle, so you're forced to go walk past the eyeballs at a slower speed. Even small things can make you feel uneasy. Take Block World for instance. On paper, there's nothing that should be uncomfortable about a room filled with blocks, but there's something interesting about the world's level geometry. A lot of the blocks in this world are placed diagonally, and since Yume Nikki was created in RPG Maker, Matasuki can only move in the 4 standard directions, so navigating through this area is kinda awkward. Nothing overly tedious, mind you, but just awkward enough to give the world an unnatural feeling. And a lot of other worlds in the game also use diagonal terrain in a similar way. However, there's one last trick up Yume Nikki's sleeve, one aspect of the game that sends chills down the spine of every player. This right here is a Tori Ningen, or a bird human if you want a rough translation. Although a lot of interpretations of them use some sort of body horror, if you were to look just at their sprite, they're not that scary of an enemy in comparison to something like Pyramid Head. My reaction from the stream clip that I showed would probably seem unwarranted without any context, but once you understand how they work in the context of Yume Nikki, you'd probably have that reaction too. You see, unless you want to count events that you have to go out of your way to activate like Uboa and Face, the Tori Ningen is the only enemy type in the whole game. There's 2 variants, the slower ones, and more importantly, the purple ones that will actively chase you. If either of these variants touch you, you'll get trapped in an enclosed area. From here, you're forced to undergo the tedious process of waking up, going back to sleep, and then returning to where you wanted to be. This is a big penalty, especially since the Tori Ningens are placed in areas that take a lot of backtracking to return to. As such, anytime a player sees a Tori Ningen, they're going to feel wary, and that adds to the unease they'll get when they travel through Matasuki's dreams. You'll always be on edge because when you enter a new world, one of these fuckers could show up. Not only that, but the specific areas that the Tori Ningens appear in add to the mood. There's a checkered tile path, which I already mentioned. There's Hell, which is, hell. And finally, there's the Guillotine World. You enter this area from a spout of blood and are greeted by an ominous shade of purple and an aggressive music track. Also, while you're navigating this area, there's 2 Tori Ningens, or maybe even 8 of them chasing you down. And to top it all off, there's an effect here, so if you want to get the true ending, this area is completely mandatory. But let's go back to something I said earlier. Also, while you're navigating this area, there's 2 Tori Ningens, or maybe even 8 of them chasing you down. Well, if you enter Guillotine World, there's a 1/8 chance that 8 Tori Ningens will appear instead of the usual 2. Activating this Easter egg doesn't have any relevance to completing the game, but it's still interesting nonetheless. And this is just one of the many hidden secrets within Yume Nikki. There's plenty of times where the game uses RNG to determine whether a specific occurrence will happen. If you find one of 5 beds in the dream world and sleep on them, there's a 20% chance that you will be transported to the hand staircase. There's a tile in the FC dungeon that has a 1/3 chance of causing an Easter egg inspired by a glitch from Earthbound. And even something as simple as waking up has a chance of loading an Easter egg. I heard of this Easter egg before, but I never got it. Holy shit. In addition, there's plenty of Easter eggs you can find by using a specific effect on a specific NPC. Let's start in the White Desert with this fellow right here, Dave Spector. My finger slipped. By using the knife effect on Dave here, you can unlock access to a hidden area. In this hidden area, you can find a girl named Mano. If you talk to her, you will see a close-up of her face, and then she teleports to another part of the room. There isn't any explanation for who Mano is, which has led to a fair bit of fan theories about her. One notable theory is that she's related to another White Desert NPC, Monaco. Like Dave Specter before her, you can get some interesting results if you use a specific effect. This time, what you want to do is use a stoplight effect on her to make her look like this. And just like Mano, you can interact with her to get a close-up. Finally, I want to talk about an NPC that's so well hidden that most players don't even know they exist. If you want to find this NPC, you have to go to Number World and then go near this body of water. What you want to do now is repeatedly use the cat effect, which brings NPCs closer to Matasuki. Doing this will allow you to see an NPC that fans have dubbed as Steve Leaf Kariha. Now, most of these Easter eggs are extraordinarily hard to find without a guide, and a lot of other stuff in Yume Nikki fits that description. This is one of the main criticisms that's been aimed towards the game. This would be a death sentence for most games, but for some reason the aspect in question is a big part of Yume Nikki's charm. Being lost in this mysterious game and needing external resources to do anything adds to the uncomfortable feeling it gives off. Not only that, but there's some moments in the game that are even more impactful if you know that they're coming. To explain what I mean, let's talk about the most well-known thing in Yume Nikki. Let's talk about Uboa. Uboa is found in an isolated house within the Pink Sea. At first glance, this house only has two things of note, an NPC and a light switch that you can interact with. But if you repeatedly go through the process of turning off the light switch, exiting the room, and trying again, Uboa will show up. The mood completely changes, the door gets locked, and touching Uboa transports you to an area where you're basically forced to pinch yourself awake. Now, Uboa has a 1 in 64 chance of appearing, so a player would have to be ridiculously lucky to find them without prior knowledge. But the Uboa event is designed in such a way that it's even creepier when you actively seek it out. Every time you re-enter the room and go to turn off the lights, there's this creepy feeling of dread that this could be the one where he shows up. You can stop at any time, but nevertheless, you will persist. Not only that, but the number of tries it takes for Uboa to show up differs from person to person. On my first ever playthrough, he caught me off guard by showing up on the 3rd try. But for other people, it could take hundreds of tries to get him to show his ugly face. That's just how RNG-based events work. They're going to be a completely different experience on every playthrough. And when these RNG effects are combined with the game's general structure, the end result is a game that feels deeply personal. As I said earlier, Yume Nikki has a small but passionate fanbase. There's plenty of comments floating around from people who found it impactful on a deep personal level. There's plenty of talented people creating both fan art and fan animations related to the game. There's even plenty of games that take inspiration from the game, whether it's fan projects like Dotflow and Yume Tuigi, or more popular games like Undertale, Lisa, Doki Doki, and Twitter Fanboy Undertale. And really, this is because of everything I've talked about so far, from the sense of mystery caused by Kikiyama's minimal presence, to the various hidden secrets, to the overall non-linear structure. The Yume Nikki experience is going to be drastically different for each player. Everyone will visit completely different areas, see completely different events, and interpret everything they see in a completely different way. That last one is particularly noteworthy because there's a ton of theories about Yume Nikki. In the process of research, I opened up the Yume Nikki Wiki's theories page, expecting the usual bullshit about how everyone is actually dead and QQ secretly represents the evils of circumcision, but I ended up finding some actually interesting stuff. The page focuses more on broader motifs like escapism, anxiety, and Paraka's imagery as opposed to the over-the-top MapPa style reveals. One theory that I thought was particularly interesting is that some parts of Yume Nikki could represent gender dysphoria. I mean, there's a part of the game where Matasuki is literally in the closet. But at the end of the day, no theory about Yume Nikki can ever be confirmed or denied. Kikiyama is a very secretive person, and it's best to respect their privacy. And if they're staying away from places like Reddit and Twitter, they're way smarter than all of us. However, while you can't find out Kikiyama's interpretation of the game, there's still another interpretation you can find out. Your own. There's a reason that Yume Nikki elicits such deep personal emotions. When players are forced to come up with their own interpretations, chances are that the interpretation they'll come up with relates to themselves in some way. No matter how abstract any part of the game could be, there's always something personal that you could project onto it. For instance, I personally relate to the overall atmosphere. The emptiness of the game's world brings me back to the nights I'd spend pacing around my college after most people had left, just waiting for my mom to pick me up. Most NPCs ignoring Matasuki conjure up the feelings of loneliness that were all too common in my high school years and got to the point where I'd eat lunch on the cafeteria floor just to attract any type of attention. Even if I wasn't able to place my finger on it while playing, there was always something in Yume Nikki that felt personal to me. And that's why Yume Nikki means so much to some people. That's why it inspires so much creativity through art, animations, and other games. That's why there's no other game that feels like it. When you play Yume Nikki, you'll find a piece of yourself somewhere in it. So what do you say? Do you want to find that piece? Yume Nikki is pretty short, so there's not much of an opportunity cost to playing it. There's also not much of a literal cost either, since it's available for free on Steam. And it's an RPG Maker game from 2004, so even the potatoist of potato PCs can run it with ease. Even though it hasn't been a full year since I first played it, Yume Nikki is a game that means a lot to me. And I'm glad that I was able to share it with all of you, even if it was just for a single video. Thanks for watching.